Welcome to another brand new episode of the Tech Your Business podcast, where we show you different ways you can use tech to stay ahead of the competition. Today on the Tech Your Business podcast, we'll be talking about a topic that is really important, but I think most people take this topic from an angle that it shouldn't be, and that's the topic of accessibility. Today, to talk about accessibility with us is Maxwell Ivey. So, welcome to the show, Maxwell.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. And I appreciate that one part of your intro because I personally love showing people how they can take accessibility from a regulatory challenge to a competitive advantage. And it sounds like that's the whole purpose of your podcast.
Exactly. So now you talked about this from a regulatory challenge to an opportunity. So can you just share a story that shows how a business owner's perspective changed when they started taking accessibility from this angle you talk about?
Okay. I recently interviewed the CEO of Less Annoying CRM for my new podcast, The Accessibility Advantage. And uh, like maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago, a couple of their employees came to them and said, "We would like to invest some of our time in improving the accessibility of our service." And the company said, "Okay, we will let you invest a certain number of your hours as customer service people to try to make it better." Because after they thought about it, they said, if we improve accessibility and we improve user experience at the same time, then we should be able to decrease the workload of our customer service people and give them a better work life experience, because being a customer service is a thankless way to make a living. So they listened to them. They started doing the research to see how to make their content, their client relationship management software accessible. They did it through a combination of their own coding and using some open source stuff, and they've come up with a very accessible solution, in my opinion. I use them and I tell other people about them. But here's a couple of things they didn't anticipate. One is it has led to less strain on their customer service, so fewer hours having to be invested, fewer new staff having to be hired in that area, less money spent on turnover, education, etc. But here was the really cool part. They found out that a lot of the young people that make up the portion of the employment or employee market that they would really love to target, the kind of talent that they have to compete for against people like Google and Apple and the big companies with huge budgets that can offer the moon, they found out that a lot of these young people value social responsibility. And so they now can use their investment in accessibility and inclusion, both inclusion of people with disabilities as well as inclusion of all other types of people who are usually marginalized, such as African American, Latino, people with representing various genders. They found that it made them more competitive in the hiring market, which means they can get better talent. And sometimes they can even get that better talent for less money than they would have had to pay if they had been competing strictly on dollars and other benefits. So here's an example that they never expected. I have talked to company owners who say that their employees are starting to see accessibility as a future skill that employers will want to hire them for. So they are happy to take the time and use the business's options for personal education to learn about accessibility, then invest that accessibility knowledge in their own companies, knowing that they can add that to their CV or their resume. So lots of places where it has resulted. Um, and then, of course, if we want to talk about less digital but more physical, most people don't realize that the first talking GPS was developed strictly for the visually impaired, and we had to pay quite a bit
Wow.
of money to own those units. That a lot of people here in the U.S. and in other parts of the world complain about having to spend the money to have curve cutouts for wheelchair users. but it turns out those curve cutouts make the lives of people who deliver goods and parents pushing trolleys or trams, they make those people's
Yeah.
lives easier. So there's all sorts of expected and unexpected benefits from being more inclusive. And so that's the thing. Just one last example. One thing that really helps people with low vision, but who still have enough vision that they don't depend on a screen reader like I do, is being able to have high contrast colors for their text choices, but also being able to invert the colors. So being able to switch from black text on a white background to white text on a black background, for example. Well, I recently found out that when you give somebody the opportunity to invert the text, excuse me, that makes that text easier to read on a mobile device in extremely low or extremely bright light. When you consider how many people who are customers of a business that nowadays are visiting their website or even purchasing products using their tablets or phones, the idea that something that you would do for the visually impaired can make it much easier for these people to visit your websites on their mobile devices when they're wherever they happen to be, that's an advantage, you know. So lots of these things, they start out as something you do for people with disabilities, and they
Yeah.
can have great unintended consequences.
That's actually a very interesting story, and actually some things that I never even thought about. So now, a lot of our listeners, when they hear accessibility, I think, especially for we who build websites and co, one of the first things you think about when you hear about accessibility is adding descriptions and alternate text to images. But in the case of a business, can you help us describe the full scope of what accessibility means to a business? What are the things that need to be changed and added?
Right. So I will talk about alt text a little bit because I have a bit of information about that that's different than what most people have probably heard that will benefit them as far as deciding uh, to do them and then how to do them. So I say start with the purpose of your business and your website. Make sure you're making the most important thing the most important thing. Once you eliminate all the clutter, you take pages, links, images off your homepage or your sub pages that aren't necessarily needed to be there to perform the function of your website. You focus on the most important thing, you eliminate a lot of the potential for problems with accessibility. Then use a minimalistic approach. The fewer items on each page, the better. People using adaptive technology, whether it's me using a screen reader or somebody using screen magnification, or someone who uses a mechanical switch device because they have limited motor control or they're missing a limb, or even people that are in the developmental disability segment of the population, the fewer items, the better. You want people to be able to get from the door of your website to find out what they need to know to make a decision, to making that decision, to then taking an action, whether that's subscribing to a list, making a purchase, scheduling a call, whatever that ultimate purpose is. Then most people don't realize this, but when you use adaptive technology, you don't usually have access to a mouse. So always design from the point of view of a keyboard user first, and then expand beyond that. And then also a lot of the fancy stuff that the webmasters will tell you that you need to have on your website to maintain traffic. So many of those can cause problems for people who have a disability. I just recently learned something about GIFs I didn't know. I tell people when it comes to emoticon stickers and GIFs that stickers and emoticons are fine. GIFs are not accessible, but I only knew that in terms of being a visually impaired person. It turns out if you put GIFs on your website, you need to have a button so somebody who has ADHD or related disease can stop the GIFs,
Whoa.
because even that small amount of a very small image in motion can trigger a very negative, traumatic response in some people, depending on what type of ADHD or other related disease they have and how severe it is. So keep it simple, minimal, get people from point A to point B, and start from the point of view of a keyboard user. Those would be the things I would say would really help you avoid a lot of the problems. Uh, then, as to alt text, when you add that text, it is indexed by the search engines, Google, Bing, Siri. They all pay attention to that text. The first 150 to 180 characters of it will be indexed. The rest of it will be ignored. And what I find is a lot of companies will just put the name of their business or the name of their business and what they do. They very rarely describe those images because it's just more work than they want to do at this time. So, what I hope that people will do is once they realize that's indexed, that they'll use that as the motivation they need to create actual alt text descriptions, and that they'll use half of that text to tell me what the image is, uh, what the people
Yeah.
look like, what they're wearing, what the product is, the items in that image that would compel me to want to do business with you or to want to make a purchase from you. The old, know, like, trust. And
Yeah.
I tell business owners, you spent a lot of time and money creating these images. You should spend just as much time describing those images for the people that have a disability who need those descriptions and also for the search engines. So you're welcome to use that second half or third to stuff some keywords in there to help Google find you. I'm not going to tell you not to, but it gets really old when you go to website after website and all the images just say the name of the company or the name of their logo. So that would be what I would tell people as far as alt text. Try to put yourself in the position of the other person that might be reading that text to see, what can I tell them that would compel them to make a purchase. And then if once you get to this point, the next most important thing for people is their forms, because the forms are the lifeblood of any business. Whether you're talking about a sales checkout, an email sign up, a calendar to schedule an appointment to meet with you, the form is going to make you or break you. And I've been finding lately when I talk about this on podcasts that hosts are sharing their own nightmare experiences of clients that they've worked with who
Yeah.
they found out had very poorly designed forms. So I would say once you build it first, if you don't know for sure you can build an accessible form, don't do it. If you're not
Mm.
sure, use Google Forms, use one of the other three or four highly recommended options like TypePad that are out there. Follow their instructions, include good descriptive text so that somebody with a screen reader knows what they're supposed to put in the fields. Keep it as simple as possible. If you don't need information, don't ask for it. And then test your own form. And somebody recently said, Mike, but if I test my form, I can't test it for accessibility. And I'm like, yeah, but if you test your form, you're gonna find a lot of the problems, because the things that cause somebody with a disability a headache are also going to cause somebody who doesn't have a disability a headache. So test your own
Yeah.
forms. I never create a new form without subscribing to it myself. I'm the first one that uses it. Of course, I have an advantage in that I use the technology regularly. But uh, ask yourself, is this something that's confusing? Am I willing to risk somebody not doing business with me over this particular item? And then again, the simpler the better. Why use tabs or buttons when you can just use check boxes? Why use search boxes when you can use select boxes? Why use any of them when you can just use text fields? So that would be what I would say with the forums. And then when it comes to people's websites, usually the next thing somebody asks me about is they'll go, "But Max, if I wanted to, how do I test my website?"
Yeah.
So, did I address most of the questions you had as far as how to
Yes,
avoid
yes,
problems?
yes. Yes, you did. You did. So now for a lot of the people watching this podcast, business owners, a lot of them are e-commerce businesses. They have um, e-commerce websites built on different platforms. So now, from doing online shopping on these popular platforms, from the perspective of a visually impaired person, what would you say makes it either frustrating or makes it delightful? And how would you say these e-commerce business owners can improve the experience?
Right, right. Okay, first I want to give the e-commerce business people a warning. I've recently learned that a lot of business owners, when they use other sites, say like you're using Shopify, or you're using
Yeah,
the shopping cart from your web hosting provider, or you're using PayPal, or whatever it is you're using, don't ever assume that that third party has tested your shopping cart for people with disabilities. Um, I know that we like to assume that since we're paying them good money and they've got multiple customers and they've been doing it for a while, that they're creating content on your behalf or helping you create content that's accessible. But that is not always the case. So I would suggest that once you build your shopping cart, find a website like Waves or Audio Eye. And there's a few others out there that are free sites where you can do a basic checker that'll tell you the accessibility level of your page as it is. At least run a basic one so you can see, like the really horrible stuff that automation is able to catch versus the more nuanced stuff that it still takes a human being to understand when it's wrong. So I would say don't assume that just because you're dealing with Shopify that your card is accessible, because it may be, but it may not, especially if on top of that shopping cart you're using additional plugins from other software providers, which I
yeah,
run into with WordPress all the time. I use WordPress for my website. Not every plugin that's created for WordPress, and not even every plugin that's created by the WordPress team that's approved by
yeah.
them will be accessible or will create accessible content. So that's one thing. I would say one thing that would really help as far as just navigating websites would be if people made more effort in organizing their products so that they're easier to navigate. So there's, say, categories are good, headings are good. Having dozens or hundreds of items on one screen together is bad. Although I understand that sighted people like to have as much stuff on their screen as they can get. So I don't know about that part of it, but uh, categories are good. And then um, items within the categories, and then giving the person who's viewing all this information the option, either in settings or temporarily, to change the amount of information they're going to have on their screen at one time. Because it's not just people with screen readers like me, but it's also people who use screen magnification that may have to go up to 10, 12, or 14 times normal size in order to still see the text on the screen. And then, of course, we can't forget our mobile friends. So,
Yeah.
uh, better organization, better descriptions, uh, an easier way to find accurate sizing information if you're purchasing clothing, especially. And just this is one that I don't get to share as often, but I really love to because it's one of those that most people just don't think about. And by the way, that's the case with a lot of accessibility issues. Most of this is not the able-bodied world has a vendetta against the disabled people. Most of it is
Yeah.
just they don't think about it, or they don't have the time, or they just don't have any personal experience. So most people don't think about the names they give the colors that they use when describing their products or when naming their products. So, as I like to tell people, I used to have perfect vision until I was about 10 or 12, and then my vision went very, very bad very quickly. So, I can remember about 24 colors in my crayon box. You
Hmm.
know, so if you tell me light blue or navy or brown or orange, I know those colors. But if you tell me burnt sienna, I can't help you. If you tell me gray heather, I can't help you. If you tell me, what is that? It's the name of one of those islands over in Greece, Corsica or something. I mean, um, my favorite, and I recently found out that if you ask Alexa or Google, they can tell you what the base colors are that go with a color name. But as a
Yeah.
person, I really shouldn't have to do that. That takes extra time. So, um, but my favorite one, because me and some friends were actually, just playing around, seeing what Alexa would say. And a friend of mine is a very girly girl, and she had a color of nail polish. She said, "Max, try this one for me." And the name of the nail polish is "I am not a waitress." Now, how the heck am I supposed to know what color that is? Uh, it turned out it's like a really deep red with pink striations going through it. But I mean, thankfully, most colors that are registered, they're registered through websites, and Alexa and Google can access that information. But it'd be so much easier if, when y'all wrote the descriptions on your website, the colors used simple color names. And if you're just so sold on a particular color, fine, but explain to us what the heck that means. And I think if you had a way of testing it, you'd find out that it's not just the blind people who would like to know what the heck that color means. Um, Another thing is, a lot of times you look at items, and there will be one item, but it'll be available in multiple colors or sizes. And as you change colors and sizes, the or the descriptions don't change. I mean, you don't get the descriptions of the colors of the so more being able to access more information through a pop-up or an accordion, as we call it, when needed, is great, because then you have the advantage of having the information when you need it, but not having it filling up space on the screen when you don't need it. So I would say, sizing, color information, and of course, that also applies to furniture or appliances, electronics, anything that it can help better inform the customer with the description, um, will be helpful, and even more helpful to somebody who can't see the device. Now, I've been having a problem with uh, LED lights over the last 2 or 3 years. We've been trying to find one that is accessible, that I can control without having somebody else set it for me, or having to count clicks or count tones and try to remember what color and what light strength it's set to. And we've tried many of them. And recently, Audio Eye, which they asked me to be one of the hosts of their podcast, so they bought me some new gear, and they purchased an LED light, and we got it, and it was like, well, this ain't accessible either. And when I asked them, I said, y'all are a big company. Y'all have sighted people who could do this research. I said, why couldn't y'all find something that would be accessible? And their answer was, the manufacturers just don't give you the information you need to make that decision with any degree of reliability. So, as I said, it's not just the disabled people who need that information, but it's great if you can deliver that information in a way where it's available, but not taking up space on the website until it's needed. So, accordions and pop ups work great for that. Being able to click a link and open up a next page works great for that as well. So, just consider that uh, the information is going to help you make a sale, but there are probably just as many people who don't need the information. They've done their research somewhere else, or they have the ability to eyeball it for themselves, and so they don't need the edit. But it's great if you can make it available in a way that doesn't take up space on the screen until it's needed.
Amazing. So now, in the last 2 years, there has been almost everything has AI. Almost everywhere, every device, every app, every website, everything has AI. So, what impact has AI had, and AI and technology? What impacts have they had on accessibility in the last few years, and how do you see them changing it going forward?
Right. Well, in one sense, the most important place for AI, the one place people are probably hoping I'm going to tell them that AI has solved their problem, has to come with the image descriptions. And there's some great work that's been done in AI to describe images for people who are visually impaired, but it hasn't been tested to determine if the output is actually going to be effective or not. So
Hmm.
it's promising. I was recently asked to try out um, a new widget for AI called Pixie that's supposed to be very good at describing images. So we'll see. It will probably eventually get there. But kind of like with closed captions, we have this now with Zoom and Google Meet, etc., where if you select the options, it can do the automated closed captioning while you're having a conversation, and that's being done
Hmm.
by AI, just like the automated transcripts are being done by AI. But we all know that even as good as AI is right now, you still have to edit that stuff once it's through. So I think that's kind of where we're at with the alt text descriptions is it has to be edited, but editing a description that's already there is still much easier than having to think up your own description all by yourself. So that is something. I think a couple of really cool places for artificial intelligence is, as I mentioned earlier, when you use adaptive technology, it takes longer to do everything than it takes anybody else. So I feel like
Yeah.
being able to use AI to complete forms, to even have it fill out large sections of things for me. Like for example, I'm a LinkedIn user, and quite often somebody will post a position where they're looking for an accessibility expert, and they'll have either an easy apply or apply on the website. And you click the apply on the website, and the thing is like, you want to give us permission to grab all this information from LinkedIn and then enter it into the form for you. And I'm like, heck yes, I'll take that. Yeah, sure. So being able uh, to to cut down on your workload by having text entered for you, having selections made on in certain cases for you, being able to describe images for you, those things are very helpful. Um, and also AI being able to help filter search results. Being able to have fewer things that I have to search through till I find what I thought I was telling the search engine to look for in the first place. So,
Yeah.
improved AI can help there. But I really feel like, most of us in business, we send a lot of emails or direct messages. We do those things over and over again, and AI can really help with that. Uh, Also, with creating copy, with figuring out what to say. I mean, I have been impressed by AI when if I'm creating a new profile somewhere and it says, "Would you like to see what AI would say about your about you description?" And you click it and
Hmm.
you're like, "Yeah, that is so much better than what I wrote." And I feel kind of bad about that because it makes me wonder about my friends who are creative, talented copywriters and writers in general. And of course, I'm also a freelance writer myself, but I feel like AI may be able to do something with technical work, but I don't think it could do anything with with storytelling, whether that's fictional or nonfiction. So I think I'm okay there, but there is a fear. And that's another place where people with disabilities are no different than everybody else. Except the fear is more real for the disability community because the unemployment level in the disability community is 75% among people with physical disabilities and 85% among people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. And those numbers haven't changed, even in what they say is one of the tightest job markets in the United States in two generations. And nobody
Wow.
knows why people won't hire the disabled. I like to have conversations with business owners all the time to see if maybe we're not speaking the right language, or if we're not making the emphasis on the right things to get them to hire people. But I think it says a lot about the United States, especially, where instead of more people with disabilities getting work, we are lowering the minimum age at which can work. We are raising the retirement age for people who do things like fly planes. We are doing lots of things to make it easier to find employees, but we're still not making any progress for people with disabilities to have work. So for the disabled, the threat that AI may eventually cost you work is very real, because so few of them have work as it is. And there are a lot of people out there in the world who are like, is AI coming for my job? And I don't honestly think it is. I don't think we're anywhere near the case where in my community people are looking at going back to begging on street corners or being put in asylums. But I understand the fear, and I think it's another one of those places where we have more in common than we have different, if people have a few minutes to think about it.
Yeah, true. So now for a business owner who has listened so far and gotten a lot of insights and co from you, and is inspired to start making their business, especially their business technology, more accessible, what are three simple changes they can make this week as they finish listening to this episode that will put them on a good standing with
All right.
accessibility?
I'm going to give them a couple that are just things they can do, but I'm going to give them one that I think is more important than the actual technical things. Um, the most important thing I can tell you is that solving for accessibility is not alien, it's not foreign, it's not something you can't do. Solving for accessibility and inclusion is no different than solving any other problem in your business. So ask yourself, how would I solve for slow sales, low website traffic? Um, how would I solve for my accounts payable growing and people not paying their bills? What is my process? And then apply that same process to improving the accessibility of your website or your physical products or services. Apply that same process to your workplace if you're wanting to employ more people who have disabilities. So that would be the most important thing. Change your mindset. It is not as hard as you think it is, and you can do this. There's nothing about accessibility I know that you can't learn, or that you probably don't already know a little bit about, just from your experiences on the internet over the course of time. So that would be the most important thing I would tell them about being more inclusive. Uh,
Hmm.
Next, don't forget that keyboard first is the way to build an accessible website. Uh, Anything that requires a mouse click is leaving yourself open to the possibility that a customer won't be able to complete the sale because they can't click that button that says publish, submit, whatever words you have for go ahead and take my money. You know,
Yeah.
so keyboard first. Those are two things, and then the third thing is you don't have to get this right today. Accessibility is a process, not a perfection. And what the disability community wants is sincere effort. And there are many of us out here, both paid and volunteer, who are ready to help somebody that's ready to make the effort. So, like, people wanted to hire me, they could go to the accessibilityadvantage.com. But there are nonprofit organizations that have resource lists that can help you. There are social media groups where people who just enjoy helping others will answer questions for you. There are the free websites, like I mentioned earlier, at Audio Eye and Waves. So those are some things you can do to get your current site tested and see how you're doing and what you need to fix. And I would say one last thing is put some sort of a statement on your website, something to the effect of, I am not sure about the accessibility of this site, or
Hmm.
I think the accessibility of this site is very good, but I would be more than happy to address any concerns that you happen to have, and then give them a point of contact that's different than the point of contact that everybody else would use. Make sure that anytime somebody has an issue with disability, that they can communicate that with you, because quite often the person with a disability just wants to accomplish a purpose. And if
Yeah.
you can help them do that in whatever way that makes sense for both parties, then that's a win. And to me, when it comes to accessibility, there's done for you, done with you, and do it yourself, as there is in a lot of other professions. So make sure people can contact you. If you have an established customer service, technical service process, make sure there's a place to break out of the usual loop to send questions that are obviously about accessibility or disability to somebody else who can take the time to really look into them. And then communicate, because quite often it's not a matter of accessibility, it's a matter of a lack of understanding. The
Yeah.
business owner just doesn't realize what they did was causing someone an issue, or the person trying to use the website or app doesn't completely understand why the website owner did something in a particular way. So communicate. Make sure there's a way for people to contact you and not just so they can buy from you.
Amazing. So now for listeners who have or watchers who have come this far, who have enjoyed this episode and they want to continue the conversation, connect with you or consult with you on improving their business accessibility, is the website you mentioned, accessibilityadvantage.com, the best way for them to reach you?
Yes, that is the best way. And I'll go ahead and mention my email address as well. It's the accessibilityadvantage at gmail.com. I want people to be able to easily get a hold of me. I don't believe that you have to be someone who's ready to buy something from me, book me, or hire me in order to talk to me. I find that some of the best things that have happened in my professional life have been unscripted conversations with no agendas, with people who had the courage to reach out and say they had a question or a concern. And, occasionally somebody reaching out to tell me they disagreed with what I had to say. So I hope you will visit the website or use the email address and say hello. If you have a particular question that we didn't address today, put that in the message. Very friendly, very willing to answer questions. And and when it comes to reviewing websites, I see it as a way of helping other people with disabilities, at the same time helping you be a more successful business owner.
Amazing, amazing. So thank you so much. The link to your website and your email will be on the screen in the show notes once this episode goes live. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and especially for this to be at the end of your day after you've already put in a hard day. I appreciate the effort.
Thank you. Now, and for the listeners, did you learn something? Were you inspired to make your website, your tech, your e-commerce website, your business more accessible? If you were, and you know someone else who needs to work on their accessibility, please share this episode with them. And till next week, when we are back with a brand new episode of the Tech Your Business podcast, don't forget to work on your website accessibility and keep taking your business. Bye for now.